Thank you for joining us. Podcast number, they just told me, but I forgot. 11?
Number 12.
12.
That's what happens when you get old.
Number 12. I'm there. Luke, chapter 10.
I'm not.
And you're going to be soon.
Yeah, I'm next up
Either
there.
that or you'll be dead. Your choice.
Yep.
Actually, it's not your choice.
No.
Anyway, Luke chapter 10 is where we're at. And I just said we don't really have a location, but we do have a location for most of this, a story at least that Jesus tells in this passage. And Matt and Ben will be teaching on this text. And so I'm just going to say, tell us what it means, and we'll be done.
Well, what we've been doing in the podcast is we've been going back to the location of where we shot the footage to start. And so one of the things that I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on is really the difference there in the Judean Wilderness. Like, what was the first thing that caught your mind when you walked into that location?
How vast it was.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one of the really cool things is when we were there, just the big difference in cultures. If you guys remember, we're standing on top of this hill or whatever when we drive up, and at the bottom you can see a Bedouin shepherd taking his flock, and I mean, we watched him for an hour, taking them through. I know you had said that there was a lot more greenery, it was a lot more green than it normally is, and so this guy's taking his flock through, and then on the top of that mountain, you've got a bus full of teenagers, and it's just like what a weird cultural difference that we're like smack dab in the middle of, So it was just really neat to experience that and see. Some of the things that we've been talking about, watching guys tend to their flocks, and we got to see it in person. It was just really cool to me to see that.
So by geography, maybe people don't realize that Jerusalem, we're always talking about going up to Jerusalem in the scripture because of it being high, elevation-wise. And we had come up out of the Dead Sea, the Rift Valley, and we're on that road up to Jerusalem, Jericho is down there. And so as you come up that road, we had come from the south. Jericho would be to the north, but we'd been to Masada, En-Gedi, Qumran, those locations. And then we're coming up that road, and it just blows your mind. And I knew that would happen to you guys when we pulled off of the road, and it just seems like you're traveling, kind of uphill, but across. And then all of a sudden, wow.
Yeah.
We come to that, over the top of that, and you can see vast, just how vast the Judean Wilderness is.
When I first pulled into it, I thought to myself, this is a place where you get robbed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, it is.
I know. And it's that's just the first thing that caught my mind was it is vast. The people are just there. If there's people out there, they're spread out, right? You're kind of by yourself.
A lot of those Bedouins all over the place there. They're either dealing with their sheep or they're trying to peddle stuff.
I should have brought my scarf.
You should have.
Yeah, was that? I was getting ready to say, was that the place Fred almost got robbed?
No.
Oh, okay.
Well, it might have been.
I think it was,
St.
wasn't it?
George's.
Oh, that's
Monastery,
right.
Which is same.
No, actually, I think it was there too.
Oh, what? It was everywhere.
For those of you, Fred's probably watching this. He was the oldest gentleman with us. I'll just leave it there. And they thought he was riding shotgun, and so they just naturally thought, well, we all think he's loaded.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, whoever's in the seat calling the shots to them is the rich guy.
Yeah.
And so when he'd step out of the car, whoo, they're on him.
Let's
And
all
we'd leave
stay
him. We just leave
together.
him.
Oh man, we looked back and there was a swarm.
Yeah.
Bedouins just
Literally.
trying to sell him everything.
So it's just is a big place. It's an open place. It's the place where those who either nobody wants them around or they don't want to be around people. That's kind of how they and it's still today. That's where they live. It's not the safest of locations when it comes to protecting your valuable stuff. It's pickpocket heaven, and so that's the setting. But Jesus walked that valley. He walked that, be it on the hilltop where we were or down along this awesome road that wanders its way along this incredible gorge. Did that surprise you too?
Yeah.
I mean, we're on rolling hill and then down this.
And it's greenery because there's water there.
Water at the bottom. Yeah.
How far is that from Jerusalem, out of curiosity?
13 miles.
Uh-huh.
Something like that? Yeah.
The whole valley.
Yeah.
So I mean, while it's separate, right, and you feel like you're in this vast wilderness area, which you are, you can look and you can see the hilltops of Jerusalem from that spot.
And so you're on a 1,200 to 2,800, 3,500 to 4,000 foot elevation change in that 13 miles. Tough road.
Yeah.
So that takes us to the story.
Luke chapter 10.
The teachers of the law. We've made the transition in the ministry of Jesus. The crowds are going to get thinned out, and the opposition is going to increase. It's going to be spearheaded by religious leaders, Jewish religious leaders. And so we have the teacher of the law coming to give Jesus a test the teacher. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Do you think he really meant it? Was he asking that question to find out, or it's a trick?
I think it's justification. We'll read that here in a little bit. But the first thing that I thought of when I read this was this is the same question that Nicodemus asked Jesus as well. This, how do I be saved, Jesus? And I don't know if he was asking because he was sincere or if he was asking just I don't know why.
Well, is it C.S. Lewis that said there are three questions that everybody asks. Where did everything come from? What's my purpose? And what happens when I die? And so whether he means it or not, he knows this is a pertinent question. And Jesus' answer, he can be used maybe to turn the people against him or to trip him up, in the law. So what is written in the law, Jesus says, how do you read it? What does that tell you real quickly about Jesus and how he teaches people and how we could maybe take something from that? We think we've got to go with this presentation. We've got to go with all the information. And what does Jesus do?
He says, what does God's word say?
He just asks questions.
And I think he knew this guy would have known, right?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, yeah, I think he would have absolutely seen through what he's trying to do here.
I think that's the best thing we can do most times is not talk so much, but just ask questions and listen. You see where people come from real quickly.
So we'll be doing silence for the remainder of the podcast.
I'll be asking questions and you guys be talking. I'll see what you know.
It'll be a short podcast.
So the man answers, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Deuteronomy chapter 6. You've answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this, and you will live. Simple.
Yeah.
I think Jesus is like, okay, go ahead and do it then.
Yeah.
Here you go. You've answered correctly.
Yeah, you look at the way the experts of the law and the Pharisees and the scribes, they always approached the law was always, okay, I've done these tasks, and so I'm justified. And Jesus always takes it from just the actual action and puts the heart behind it. I mean, that's why he talks about, don't commit adultery, but then it's more about not just the act, but also don't look on. So it's about the heart. And that's what Jesus is setting him up perfectly to do, is to take him from this actual action that this guy is focused on to, hey, here's what this really means, and it's bigger than what you think it is. It's about your heart.
Well, and you said that, the way Jesus teaches people, he's about ready to go into a parable. He does that, 40-something times in his ministry, and he teaches by example, and he's about ready to make up a story that of a man, It's it's a pretty cool way to teach people.
I think there's an important element to this that we get into as we develop the story, and that is it's not love God and love people for yourself, right? And he's talking about this so that I can have eternal life. I've got to love people, and I've got to love God. No, and Jesus just said, no, it's not about you. The whole point of loving God and loving people is it's not love you first. You don't do that for the personal gain. When you really learn to love God and really learn to love the people, then you're doing it for them. And that's where the guy's fallen short, at least as I read it. But that's what Jesus is going to tell us as we go through. He wants to justify himself, so he asks Jesus, who is my neighbor?
That's where we get the story.
This is where it starts spinning off the rails.
Do you think he's got this picture of just other Jewish leaders? Like, do you think that's how he thinks of his neighbor? because this is who he would have surrounded himself with. If he was an expert in the law, he would have surrounded himself with other law-fearing Jews.
Yep.
And I think that's what you're exactly right. When he says neighbor,
Mm-hmm.
he's thinking through that lens.
Yeah.
Because they're taught in Jewish law to hate people that are not like them.
Yep.
Right? And so, yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah.
What do you think?
We all do that,
I
don't
was
we?
gonna say, I think
Yep.
we do that still today. We surround ourselves with only people that have our same opinions, political views, like, you know.
Well, you were saying the other week that you can take your social media and you can only add people that agree with you,
Yep.
right? Anyone that doesn't agree with you, remove them. So,
Yep.
which is what you did. But
Yes. My social media has never been better. But
That's exactly what I
Just a
said.
heads up to all of you out there, you're no longer a follower of Ben.
well,
I'm not a follower
yeah,
of you.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They
Yeah.
can follow me still, but
I'm just glad that I made the cut. At least he says that I did. I don't know.
I'm not
you'll
on his
never-
page
You
anymore.
guys will never know.
Yeah.
But no, it's
Everyone go unfriend. We've been giving him trouble. Last week it was about golf. This week it's about social media. It's
Yeah, I'm used to it, and it is what it is. But no, the ease of likeness will always pull from the beauty of diversity.
Oh.
Ooh.
I heard that said one.
I was
That's
gonna say,
not,
where'd you
that's-
steal that
that's
from?
not
Man.
an original quote. We
Write
can
that-
attribute that
write
to
that
me.
down.
If you quote that, put my name under it.
Can you repeat that?
The ease
No, we
of
cannot.
likeness will always pull from the beauty of diversity.
The ease of likeness will always pull from the beauty of
That's
diversity.
got to be Rick Warren.
I think it's Matt Chandler.
I think it's Jesus.
Could have been where he got it from.
Ben Farley said.
But as these things go, that'll be attributed to me in another 20 years or so.
Yeah,
but
a Pinterest post.
yes. But what it means is like, look at your life. It is really easy to surround yourself with people that act, think, look just like you. And this is exactly where this expert in the law is thinking of when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, well, that's easy to do because my neighbors all think, speak, act, look just like me. And then Jesus takes it a step further. So
This is Jesus who taught him just a couple chapters back, love your enemies.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Pray for those who persecute you. Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, he's not about that, but they haven't caught that yet. His whole going to Kersey, when he taught about that passage, the entrance into the Gentile world, calling Matthew a tax collector, as a collaborator with the Romans. I mean, we're seeing this all the time. His inclusion of women, his elevation of women in ministry, and the roles that they're playing. Jesus is drawing all people. Last week we were talking about Tyre and Sidon and Sodom and how it had been better for them. They would have responded better than his hometown. Jesus he's really showing that the big picture God is up to is for everybody.
Mhm.
well, it's no wonder they wanted to kill him. When you put it like that, he is directly violating a lot of their cultural norms. And
He's undermining this guy's authority as well.
yeah, absolutely.
Take it
And-
all away.
And so it's no wonder that they plot to kill him.
Well, this was
He's-
a setup question,
yeah.
Mhm.
and
It's the expert in the law. I love the way Luke frames that. The expert in the law talks to the God of the universe
Yep.
and tries to trick him.
well, then he answers.
Good luck.
He answers, and what does he say? Okay, go ahead and do it.
Yep.
But then he asks the question. Well, let's define who the neighbor is here.
Right.
Let's make sure we're on the same page.
Which reveals the man's heart. This is all
Absolutely.
about himself. It's not about his neighbor that he really
Well,
wants to
and
help.
when I was in college, one of my professors told me that this is the most misunderstood parable in all of the Bible, which is quite a statement. I don't.
Oh, why are we here?
Basically, is this whole idea of that this is often taught and preached about this. Like this is where it ends. We start then going into the neighbor side of things, meeting people where they're at, and we miss the point that's about ready to come. So I don't want to steal it yet.
Well, don't let me mess up.
Oh, you're fine. I don't know if that's even an accurate
Who is
statement.
my neighbor.
I was going to say, is the college you went to still in
No,
existence?
Yes,
Okay.
but
Hey, no, wait.
it's we're on live video. I'm leaving that alone.
There.
The guy who asked it is rock solid and retired.
In
got
reply,
out.
Jesus said,
He got old. Period.
hey, let me read Jesus' words.
Yeah,
I'm
please
getting to
save-
the red letter
save
part.
this.
You be quiet.
Okay.
A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you have." So tell us what's happened so far in the story. What's the meaning so far?
Well, I think the way he starts the story, and make sure I'm on the right track here, is
one went dead wrong
Jericho
now. It doesn't matter.
Samaritan territory at this time, or is it? Would it have been Jew controlled?
That's a good question.
That's a good question.
Because if it's Samaritan territory, and again, this is all contingent upon it being that, but Jesus starts by saying that he was attacked by robbers, they took everything from him, and you have to realize that this Jewish guy would have been like, yep, that's exactly what would have happened in Samaritan territory. So if that is the case, he sets him up to kind of play to these biases, but then he goes into the story and just totally flips it, and that's the guy who ends up helping him. And so I think it's interesting, if that geographical location is true, then Jesus is kind of setting up to play to that bias, but then totally contradicting that at the end of the story.
Yeah, I don't know about the territory issue, and I'll ask that people who watch this, one of you needs to find that answer and send it to us.
Yeah.
Somebody
before Wednesday at 10 a.m.
Somebody.
Because that would be a great point if that is true. If not, it's heresy. But
Well, even if it's not true, that the cultural difference, the hatred that existed, the animosity between Jew and Samaritan, that is the story.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
That is the story. That is where it's playing, whether or not that territory specifically. I know I've always heard, and it was obvious when we were there, we talked about this, it's wilderness. It's the place where the bandit and the robber would hide. It is the place, if you wanted to ambush somebody, would have been easy to do. But from Jericho to Jerusalem, this is the route that they would have taken. And so this story all plays into that cultural hatred of the Samaritan either way.
I think it's interesting that because it's a parable, right? There's many ways to apply this. You can look at it through multiple different lenses. I think this guy's really kind of asking the wrong question, because Jesus is taking the opportunity to evangelize, if you will, to this man, right? And he's deflecting, asking, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus is making it about him. He's taking the opportunity to show this guy, listen, like, even on your best day, you're not as good as this guy.
So I think we got to remember the secondary audience. The primary audience is the conversation he's having with this gentleman.
Yeah.
But the secondary audience is all these people Jesus is trying to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a discipleship moment for them.
Yep.
This is just a reminder we're on mission and we're building the kingdom, and the kingdom is not just for you.
Yeah.
Well, and so even in that, like, the whole Jewish structure is not evangelism in a sense, or going or anything. It's come.
No, it's let them go to hell.
Yeah,
Really.
Yeah.
Right.
Stay away from them.
Right. But it's this: do this, and then you will be saved. And he addresses that up and, what must I do to be saved?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you're right. He asked the wrong question.
Yep.
Because Jesus answers, love God, love people, essentially, love your neighbor. And so the loving God part is they're fervent about trying to love God and do all these rules and everything to protect it, but they've forgotten what God has really instructed all of us to be a part of, and that is to show mercy, show grace, because of what God and his love in us. And so, yeah, the guy had the right answer, but he didn't have a right heart.
Yeah.
And that's what, a big part of the story is about.
Well, the guy asked the question by saying, what must I do to inherit?
Mm-hmm.
When you inherit something, you gain something that which is not yours.
Right. It's a transaction, too.
But truthfully, that's not the way they were living.
Mm-mm.
They're living a way to what must I do to earn.
Yeah.
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 And an inheritance is not earned. It's a gift.
It's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what salvation is, a gift. But yeah, there's a lot of confusion here. So the first two that come by, priest and Levite, is that purposeful? Or just random people Jesus thought of?
Well, I mean, obviously it's a parable, so it's a story that Jesus made up in his mind and shared. right? Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say.
I was reading this week all the reasons why commentaries were saying, well, this is why the priest didn't go to the other side of the road. This is why he moved. He's ritually unclean if the guy was dead, or he's going to the temple and didn't want to have to go through, ceremonial washing to then enter the, it's like, guys, like at the bottom of this is a story that Jesus is telling. Like they're coming up with all these reasons why, and it's, I don't know, it's just
So
interesting.
a parable really has one main emphasis, and he's building to it. And Ben alluded to it already. And it's not the fact this guy didn't want to be unclean, although that's true.
Yeah,
that's all true.
That's all true, but that's not the point.
The point of it being, if anybody should have helped, right?
You would think it was priest.
Yeah.
Someone who is,
If anybody should have helped, it's the Levite.
Yeah.
No.
Yep.
It was the Samaritan, the no good, dirty Samaritan.
The one that no one would choose.
Yeah. Yep. Do you remember we did, I think you taught on this passage like way back in the day, and we had cars parked at either end of this road out here on Veterans with their hoods up.
And set people up.
Yeah. And we did this little experiment to see how many people would stop and help on their way to church. And so I purposely, my wife, she wasn't in on this. I purposely drove slower right by him, and she's like, "Do you think we ought to stop?" And I was like, "I don't know. What do you think?" And
You set up your own wife?
Yeah.
Oh man.
And
that does not surprise me.
She's like, "I don't know." And I was like, "Well, we're gonna be late to church if if we stop." And she's like, "I know, but I think we should stop." And I was like, "I think we're gonna be late though, and I got to get to work."
So did you stop?
No. So I just kept giving her reasons why, and she finally, I did a pretty good job of convincing her not to stop. We got to church.
Were you driving?
Yeah.
Of course you did the convincing. You said the
Yeah.
gas.
See you later, sucker. Anyway, we get here, and it was all set up, and I mean, I got punched hard in church.
Did you?
that
You
day,
deserved
yeah.
it.
You deserve it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was just interesting because
And now you're retelling the story.
On yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I knew what was going on,
But
but
she does look good in the story, though.
yeah, she's the hero because she legitimately had concern for, I don't know who it was that was stopped that we had out there, but I think that's so true is we find all these reasons why we can't stop, and a lot of times it's because we're going to be late to church or we're going to be late to our, whatever it was, and when in reality, Jesus is really concerned about our hearts and how we obey his commands rather than the things that we're supposed to do. You know what I'm saying?
So let's stop here for just a moment and point out that this is not a story told by Jesus to make us feel guilty at Walmart when we pass a guy holding up a sign.
Right.
That is not this story. This story is about, are you willing to sacrifice yourself to love people who are different than you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it's not about if you pass by on the other side, you're really not righteous. That's not the point.
No, it's about our hearts and are we willing to really follow Jesus and share Christ and
Well, and there's a difference between empathy is not enough.
right.
Because feeling bad for someone is not what propels us to action.
Yep.
Right.
It's not necessarily just stop and give them, a Happy Meal either.
Yeah. I hear you.
So
This guy invests himself.
yes.
He
Yeah,
invests
absolutely.
himself. He's establishing a relationship. I'm paying the bill, and I'll be back.
Yep.
Yep.
I'll also tell you this, my wife, so she's like a saint, right? So
Well, we already knew that.
She-
but-
she's probably going to, hopefully she doesn't watch this, but
We'll see to that.
so she is a person that will stop and buy people food. I always tell her, don't give them money. I'm the one who's leery of all that stuff. But she stopped at McDonald's out there by our Walmart, and she bought a meal for this guy that was hungry, need food, money, all this stuff. And she went up and said, "Hey, I just want to bless you with this or whatever." And the guy's like, "Do you have any cash?" And she's like, "No, but your sign says you're hungry, you need food." And he's like, "I don't really need food. I just need cash." So yeah, it's this investment into people that really makes it. I'm not saying you shouldn't stop and help people because if you're geared that way, do it. But it's really about this investment into people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even about ourselves. That's the key point. It's not to make ourselves feel better about doing this stuff.
So that's the twist in the story. And if we would have been present when Jesus told many of his parables, at the end, when the punch comes, I think you would have heard an audible, in this instance, grinding of your teeth, grumbling.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what happens. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Well, the story is set up, and it's obvious. We know who the neighbor is, but nobody wants to admit it. Right? He does, but nobody wants to. The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy."
Wouldn't even say Samaritan. He says the
one.
The
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus said what? And here's a key. Go and what? Do.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just know. Expert in the law. I know. Go and do.
Yep.
Yep. It's not enough to ask the question.
I hate some of these stories. Like there's no getting out of this one.
No.
Yeah, and I really think that this is where a lot of people and a lot of groups find themselves, right? Asking the question, well, who needs help? Well, what do we do? And literally asking the question is not enough. Like we have to do something, you know? We've got to be propelled. You know, one of our mission statements on our three-legged stool is unleashing compassion. You know, that's why it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Because compassion isn't just something we do, it's who we are as people. It's who God's called us to be.
I have never, until just this moment, connected these two elements, but we just did the middle portion, actually the first portion of chapter 10 this past week when we talked about the missionary method,
Mm-hmm.
looking for the man of peace,
Mhm.
looking for the person who will, that's what this story is. This story is Jesus is walking along the road, and here's a person of peace because he has a need,
Mm-hmm.
and you can help meet that need, and it opens a pathway to sharing the good news. That's what God calls us to do.
Yep.
Just look for these people along the road. Not necessarily literally, but in life.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Go and do.
Go and do. That's a good way to end this one. Let's go and do.